Have you ever walked into someone's home and felt an invisible wall go up, like the warmth you expected was nowhere to be found? Maybe it was the forced smile, the distracted glances at the clock, or the heavy silence that said more than words ever could. It stings, doesn't it? As we grow older, we begin to realize that not every place is meant for us. Some homes are more draining than welcoming, stealing our peace and leaving us wondering why we bothered showing up in the first place. But here's a question. What if I told you walking away might be the most loving thing you can do for yourself? You see, not every home deserves your time and presence, especially as life gets shorter and our peace becomes more precious. Some homes welcome you with warmth and love, but others quietly drain your energy in ways you might not even realize at first. These aren't just physical spaces, they're emotional traps that can leave you feeling invisible, unwanted, or used. Take Margaret's story, for example. She's a retired teacher who always believed family gatherings were sacred. So, when her niece invited her to dinner, she showed up with her best: apple pie and small gifts for the children. But from the moment she walked in, something felt off. Her niece greeted her with a polite smile but quickly turned her attention elsewhere. The conversations were surface level, rushed, and filled with awkward pauses. No one asked about her life, and by the end of the evening, Margaret found herself sitting alone while everyone else gathered in another room. Margaret drove home that night in silence, the weight of disappointment settling on her chest. That's when she realized she wasn't invited because they wanted her there. She was invited out of obligation. Maybe you felt that same sting. You visit someone's home full of excitement, only to leave feeling emptier than when you arrived. You wonder, did I do something wrong? But here's the truth, it's not about what you did. Sometimes it's not you at all. It's the environment. And the warning signs aren't always obvious. Some homes carry a heavy energy, filled with gossip, arguments, or constant drama. Others welcome you, but only when it's convenient for them. When they need something, they call. But when you need support, they vanish. But here's the real twist. What if the home that's draining you isn't just a casual acquaintance's house? What if it's the home of someone you've known and loved your entire life? A sibling, a lifelong friend, or even one of your own children? Society tells us to tolerate these spaces because family is everything, right? But at what cost? How much of your peace are you willing to sacrifice to maintain appearances? Now, let me ask you, if you keep giving your energy to places that drain you, how much will you have left for the people and experiences that truly fill your soul? In a moment, we'll talk about 7 specific types of homes you need to avoid if you want to protect your peace and happiness. The first one might surprise you, so stay with me, you won't want to miss it. Have you ever been invited to someone's home and left wondering why you went in the first place? At first, everything seems fine, polite smiles, warm handshakes, and maybe even a cup of coffee waiting for you. But as time passes, the cracks begin to show. The conversation feels stiff, eyes dart to the clock too often, and the warmth you were expecting never quite arrives. You sit down, trying to engage in small talk, but there's a distance you can't ignore. Maybe it's in the way they respond with short answers or how they keep glancing at their phones. Or perhaps it's the fact that no one asks how you're really doing. That sinking feeling starts creeping in. Am I truly welcome here? Take Robert's story as an example. After his wife passed away, Robert made a habit of visiting his daughter's home every Sunday. He brought pastries, hoping to enjoy some time with his family and create new traditions with his grandchildren. But slowly something changed. His daughter became less enthusiastic. She would always say she was busy or distracted with house chores. His grandchildren barely came out of their rooms, and when they did, their greetings were rushed, their attention elsewhere. One afternoon, while waiting for coffee to brew, Robert overheard something that stopped him cold. His daughter whispered to her husband, "I wish Dad wouldn't come by so often. It's exhausting." Exhausting. That one word shattered everything Robert believed. For months, he thought he was bringing comfort and connection to his family. Instead, he realized he had become an obligation, a duty they tolerated rather than a presence they cherished. Now let's pause here. How would you feel if you were Robert? Could you keep showing up, knowing your presence was more of a burden than a blessing? Here's the twist. Society tells us to keep pushing through. Be the bigger person. It's family, You can't just stop visiting. But should you? At what point do you stop sacrificing your peace just to fulfill an expectation? The hardest part of aging isn't the passing of time, it's realizing that not every door should remain open, even if it once felt like home. Walking away from certain places doesn't mean you've failed or given up. It means you've chosen yourself. And let's be honest, choosing your peace is not selfish. It's survival. Ask yourself, why should I keep visiting places where I'm barely tolerated, not celebrated? Why waste your precious time trying to fit into a space that no longer embraces who you've become? You deserve to walk into homes that light up when you arrive, where your stories are welcomed, and your presence is truly valued. Life is too short to spend in spaces that steal your joy. In the next section, we'll uncover another type of home to avoid, one where the smiles may seem genuine, but beneath the surface, chaos brews. Stay with me, you'll want to hear this. At first, these homes might appear lively, full of conversations, activity, and energy. But stay a little longer, and you'll begin to notice something unsettling beneath the surface. What seems like passionate discussion quickly turns into heated arguments. Sarcastic comments fly around, thinly veiled as jokes. Complaints dominate the conversation, and before you know it, you've been pulled into an emotional vortex of chaos. Let me tell you about Linda, a retired nurse. She always looked forward to family dinners at her sister's house. It was a tradition that had lasted for years, filled with home-cooked meals and good conversation. But things changed. At one particular dinner, it all started well. Smiles, light-hearted banter, but soon the cracks appeared. Her sister and brother-in-law began arguing over something trivial, and it escalated quickly. The conversation turned into a blame game, dragging in past grievances from years ago. Harsh words were exchanged, and suddenly, Linda found herself stuck in a toxic debate that had nothing to do with her. Even attempts to change the subject were met with more negativity, complaints about neighbors, gossip about other family members, and thinly veiled jabs at each other. By the time Linda left, she felt emotionally drained, her peace completely shattered. She had entered the house in a good mood but left feeling anxious, burdened with other people's conflicts that had absolutely nothing to do with her life. Sound familiar? Some people seem to thrive on drama as if peace makes them uncomfortable. They turn minor disagreements into full-blown confrontations, dwell on old issues, and stir trouble where there's none. Their homes become emotional battlegrounds where negativity is always lurking. And here's where it gets complicated. Some of these homes belong to people you love, siblings, lifelong friends, or even your grown children. Walking away feels impossible. You've invested too much into those relationships. Society tells us to stick it out, to be there for family, no matter the cost. But let me ask you, how much is your peace worth? Here's the twist. You don't owe anyone access to your time and energy if it comes at the expense of your mental well-being. Loyalty should never demand sacrificing your inner calm. Walking away from these environments doesn't mean you've stopped caring. It means you care about yourself enough to protect your peace. If every visit leaves you drained, if you find yourself carrying someone else's emotional baggage long after you've gone home, it's time to reconsider. Why continue putting yourself in situations that do nothing but pull you down? You can set boundaries without being cruel. In fact, boundaries are an act of love, both for yourself and for others. You're showing them that your well-being matters and that relationships should be built on mutual respect, not endless conflict. Of course, this decision may stir up controversy. Some might call you selfish or accuse you of abandoning them. But remember, self-preservation isn't selfish, it's survival. In the next section, we'll discuss another type of home that can sap your energy in a more subtle but equally damaging way. A home where you're only needed, not valued. You won't want to miss this one. This one is tricky because it doesn't always feel negative, at least not at first. These homes welcome you warmly, but only when it's convenient for them. You're invited over when they need something: a babysitter for the kids, a ride to the airport, or help with home repairs. But when you need a listening ear, a bit of support, or just someone to share a cup of coffee with, they're nowhere to be found. Let me tell you about Tom, a retired mechanic with a heart of gold. Tom was the go-to person in his family whenever someone needed help. Car trouble? Call Tom. Moving day? Tom would bring his truck and work tirelessly. He never hesitated to say yes, even when it meant sacrificing his own plans. He thought this made him a valuable part of the family, until the day he needed them. One winter, Tom slipped on ice and injured his back. He couldn't drive for weeks and had trouble even getting out of bed. Expecting his family to step up as he always had for them, he reached out for help. But instead of rushing to his side, they were suddenly too busy. His calls went unanswered, and when they finally returned his messages, it was only to check if he'd recovered enough to help them with something. Tom realized something heartbreaking. He was only important to them when they needed something from him. This kind of dynamic is exhausting. It creates the illusion of closeness, but it's entirely one-sided. You give and they take. You show up for them, but when it's your turn to receive, they vanish. Here's the hard truth. Being generous and helpful is a beautiful thing, but it should never come at the cost of being used. Your kindness and time are precious, and they deserve to be met with appreciation, not taken for granted. So, how do you know if you're in one of these relationships? Pay attention to the patterns. Do they only call when they need a favor? Are you the one always initiating conversations and visits? Do they disappear when you have nothing to offer? If the answer is yes, it's time to set some boundaries. Ask yourself, am I truly valued here, or am I just being used? Here's the twist. Setting boundaries might feel uncomfortable at first. You might feel guilty, even selfish. But it's not selfish to protect yourself. In fact, it's necessary. Sometimes we mistake being needed for being loved, but they're not the same. Love is reciprocal. It's showing up for each other not just when it's easy or beneficial, but when it truly matters. If your presence is only acknowledged when there's a task to complete or a favor to grant, it's time to rethink your role in that relationship. Walking away, or at least creating distance, doesn't mean you don't care. It means you're choosing to invest your time in relationships where you're seen for who you are, not just what you can do. In the next section, we'll explore another type of home, one that feels like a burden even when no one says it out loud. Sometimes the signs are subtle, but the message is clear. You're not really wanted there. Stay with me, you won't want to miss this. Have you ever walked into someone's home and immediately sensed that you weren't truly welcome? It's not something they say outright. Most people are too polite for that. Instead, the signs are subtle but unmistakable. The forced smile, the sigh that escapes before they catch themselves, the frequent glances at the clock, or the overly casual, "Oh, we're so busy these days, but come on in." At first, you might brush it off as your imagination. But as the visit unfolds, it becomes clear. You're not a guest. You're an obligation. Barbara, a retired accountant, shared her story with me. After losing her husband, she often visited her niece, believing she was part of the family's support system. But over time, her visits felt different. The conversations were short and distracted, and the warm greetings she used to receive turned into rushed, almost transactional exchanges. One afternoon, while Barbara was telling a story from her youth, she noticed her niece scrolling on her phone, barely listening. Later, Barbara overheard her niece tell a friend, "I love my aunt, but it's just so much work when she comes over." That sentence echoed in Barbara's mind for days. She had never considered herself a burden before, but suddenly she couldn't shake the feeling that her presence wasn't truly wanted, it was just tolerated. It's a painful realization, isn't it? We want to believe that the people we care about enjoy our company, that our visits bring them joy. But when the unspoken message is, "I have more important things to do," it stings. It leaves you questioning whether you should keep visiting at all. Here's the truth. No one should have to beg for someone's time or kindness. Your presence should never feel like an inconvenience. Visiting it. Certain home leaves you feeling drained, unimportant, or like you're walking on eggshells. It's a clear sign that something needs to change. But here's the twist. This kind of situation is more common than we want to admit. And it doesn't always come from malice. Sometimes the people making you feel this way are overwhelmed themselves. They may not even realize how their actions affect you. Still, that doesn't mean you should tolerate it. You deserve to be in spaces where your presence is celebrated, not merely endured. So what do? You start by setting boundaries, not out of anger or resentment, but out of love and self-respect. Distance doesn't have to mean cutting ties. It means choosing when and how to engage in a way that protects your peace. Ask yourself, am I visiting because I feel welcome or because I feel obligated? If it's the latter, give yourself permission to pull back. You don't have to explain yourself or justify your decision. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for both yourself and others is to give them space. In the next section, we'll talk about another kind of home, the one where disrespect becomes the norm, especially for older family members. It's a painful topic, but one we need to address. Stick around, you'll want to hear this. Respect. It's such a simple word, yet it carries so much weight. As we grow older, respect becomes even more important. After all, a lifetime of experience, wisdom, and kindness should be met with appreciation, right? Sadly, that's not always the case. Some homes are filled with warmth and gratitude. Others, however, can make you feel small, dismissed, ignored, or even worse, outright disrespected. The signs are often subtle. First, someone cutting you off mid-sentence, dismissing your advice with a casual, "Oh, that's old-fashioned," or rolling their eyes when you share a story from your past. I remember hearing about Gloria, a retired librarian, who used to visit her daughter's home regularly. At first, the visits felt like a gift, time to spend with her grandchildren and stay connected with her family. But slowly, she started noticing small things that left her feeling uncomfortable. Her daughter would interrupt her constantly, correcting her or brushing off her opinions. When Gloria tried to give advice to her teenage grandson, her daughter snapped, "Mom, times have changed. No one does it that way anymore." It wasn't long before Gloria felt invisible in her own family. Conversations happened around her, not with her. Important family decisions were made without her input, even when they directly affected her. The final straw came during a family dinner when her son-in-law made a snide comment about old people being stuck in the past. Everyone laughed, except Gloria. Disrespect doesn't have to be loud or obvious to hurt. Sometimes it's in the smallest actions. The dismissive tone, the sarcastic comment, the way people ignore your presence. And over time, these little acts chip away at your self-worth. Here's the twist. Disrespect often comes from those closest to us. We expect kindness from family, yet sometimes they are the ones who forget to treat us with basic courtesy. And because we love them, we tolerate it far longer than we should. But here's what you need to remember. You deserve better. Respect is not a privilege reserved for the young or the powerful. It's a basic human need. If someone consistently makes you feel small, unimportant, or like your voice doesn't matter, it's time to ask yourself, why am I allowing this? Walking away from a situation like this isn't easy, especially when family is involved. You might feel guilty or afraid of causing conflict. But here's the truth. Staying in a space where you're disrespected does more harm than walking away ever could. Respect starts with how you allow others to treat you. By setting boundaries, you teach people what you will and won't accept. It's not about creating distance out of anger, it's about preserving your dignity. If you find yourself in a home where your words are brushed aside, your experiences minimized, or your presence ignored, it's time to reclaim your voice. You are not a burden and you are not invisible. You've earned your place at the table. In the next section, we'll explore another dangerous space, a home that quietly drains your mental health, leaving you emotionally exhausted without you even realizing it. Stay with me, you'll want to hear this. Not all harmful spaces are obvious. Some homes don't shout their toxicity, they whisper it, slowly draining your energy and happiness without you even realizing it. These homes may not be filled with constant drama or outright disrespect, but the emotional weight they carry is undeniable. You walk in feeling fine, only to leave with a heaviness you can't quite explain. Let me tell you about Carol. Carol had a close friend, Susan, whose home she often visited. On the surface, everything seemed pleasant. There were no loud arguments or cutting remarks. But every time Carol left Susan's house, she felt emotionally exhausted. It wasn't until she reflected on those visits that she recognized the pattern. Susan's conversations were always centered on negativity, complaints about her job, endless gossip about mutual friends, and constant reminders of everything wrong in the world. There was never a moment of gratitude or lightheartedness. Even when Carol tried to shift the topic to something positive, it was quickly pulled back into the same dark, heavy energy. Slowly but surely, Carol realized that these visits were taking a toll on her mental health. She began dreading the phone calls and finding excuses to avoid visiting altogether. She cared deeply for Susan, but being around her left Carol feeling anxious, depleted, and burdened with problems that weren't even hers. Here's the hard truth: toxic environments don't always come with yelling and chaos. Sometimes they come in the form of relentless negativity, passive-aggressive remarks, or a persistent sense of unease. These spaces rob you of your peace, filling you with emotions that don't belong to you. And it's not just about the words spoken, it's about the energy in the room. Have you ever walked into a space and felt the tension in the air, even when no one was speaking? That energy is real and it affects you more than you might think. Here's the twist: you can love someone and still recognize that their home is toxic for your mental health. Protecting yourself doesn't mean abandoning them, it means setting limits on how much of that energy you allow into your life. Ask yourself, how do I feel when I leave certain homes? Lighter, happier, or weighed down and anxious? If the answer is the latter, it's time to make a change. Protecting your mental health is just as important as taking care of your physical health. You wouldn't willingly expose yourself to a toxic substance, so why expose yourself to an environment that poisons your peace? It's okay to step back. It's okay to limit visits or politely decline invitations. You don't owe anyone an explanation for prioritizing your well-being. In fact, it's one of the most powerful acts of self-care you can practice. In the next section, we'll dive into one final kind of home, the one that no longer aligns with your personal growth. This is perhaps the hardest one to recognize because it feels familiar and comfortable. Until it doesn't. Stay with me, you won't want to miss this. Sometimes the hardest home to walk away from isn't toxic or filled with conflict. It's the one that feels familiar and comfortable, but deep down, you know it no longer fits the person you've become. As we grow older, our priorities shift. We crave peace, meaningful connections, and spaces that nourish our spirit. But not everyone grows with us. Some homes remain trapped in the past, locked in old patterns and outdated dynamics that no longer serve who we are today. Take Martin's story, for example. In his younger years, he loved visiting his best friend's home. Their gatherings were wild and carefree, filled with laughter, late-night card games, and storytelling. But as Martin got older, he found himself craving something different, deeper conversations, quieter moments, and a stronger sense of connection. Yet, every time he visited his old friend, it felt like stepping into a time capsule. The same stories were told, the same jokes recycled. There was always drinking involved, and the conversations never seemed to go beyond shallow topics. Martin often left feeling frustrated and empty, longing for something more meaningful. At first, he blamed himself. Why can't I enjoy this like I used to? He wondered. But then it hit him. He had grown, and the space he once loved hadn't grown with him. Here's the twist. Growth is a natural part of life, but not everyone will grow alongside you. Some people remain stuck in their old ways, clinging to familiar habits and shallow connections. It doesn't make them bad people, but it does mean that the space they create might no longer align with who you are becoming. And this is where the real challenge lies, recognizing when it's time to move on from spaces that once felt like home. It's not easy. There's a kind of grief in letting go of something familiar, but holding on to something that no longer serves you can be even more painful. When you stay too long in these spaces, you risk stagnation, trapped in old patterns that keep you from growing into the person you're meant to be. Ask yourself, does this space help me grow or does it hold me back? Do I leave feeling inspired or do I leave feeling drained and stuck in the past? The answers might surprise you. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting or abandoning the people you love. It means choosing environments that support your growth and well-being. You can still cherish the memories while giving yourself permission to step into new spaces that reflect the person you are now. Here's a powerful truth. Not every place is meant to stay in your life forever. Some spaces are only part of your journey for a while, and that's okay. Knowing when to move on is an act of wisdom, not betrayal. In the next section, we'll wrap everything up with one final lesson. A reminder about time, the most valuable resource you have. Stay with me because understanding this might just change how you live the rest of your life. If there's one truth we all learn as we grow older, it's that time is the most precious resource we have. It can't be bought, paused, or reclaimed. Every moment we spend in negativity, frustration, or spaces that drain us is a moment lost forever. The clock keeps ticking, and each passing day becomes a reminder that our time is limited. So ask yourself, where am I investing my time? Who am I giving my energy to? Do these spaces and people help me grow, or hold me back? This isn't just about walking away from negative spaces. It's about choosing the life you want to live. Every decision you make, about where you go, who you spend time with, and what kind of energy you allow into your life shapes the quality of your remaining years. Let me tell you something many people don't realize until it's too late. You are not responsible for keeping connections alive that no longer nourish you. You don't owe anyone your peace. You spent a lifetime giving to your family, friends, and community. You've done enough. Now it's time to give something back to yourself. Walking away without guilt isn't selfish, it's freeing. Protecting your well-being is not an act of cruelty, but of self-love. When you choose peace over obligation, joy over frustration, and stillness over noise, you open the door to something truly beautiful. A life that reflects who you are, not who others expect you to be. Here's the twist. Sometimes the hardest person to convince of this truth is yourself. We carry guilt for leaving behind familiar spaces, believing that loyalty means enduring discomfort. But what if loyalty to yourself is the most important kind of loyalty? Living for yourself doesn't mean abandoning others. It means honoring the person you've become. If you've stayed with me until now, I want to leave you with one final question. What kind of life do you want to create from this moment on? You have the power to decide. You can continue to give your time and energy to places that drain you, or you can reclaim it and spend it where it matters most. Choose peace. Choose joy. Choose the spaces that lift you up, not pull you down. Let me know in the comments below, what lesson resonated with you the most from this video? What change are you ready to make in your life today? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for spending your valuable time with me. I appreciate you, and I'll see you in the next video.